We bring ancient wisdom to life through modern technology, creating a bridge between the lessons of the past and the challenges of tomorrow. Join our unique exploration of what it means to be human. Subscribe now and help us build a bridge to the future. My brother left his reading glasses at my house on a Sunday afternoon. That was the only reason I walked back into the spare bedroom at all. He had stopped by after church, the way he always did, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and talking about nothing in particular. The weather, the neighbor's new fence, whether the hardware store downtown was really going to close. Normal things. Comfortable things. He left around 2, and I stood at the front window and watched his truck pull out of the driveway, the same truck he'd driven for 11 years. And I thought about how lucky I was to still have him nearby after everything. His glasses were on the nightstand beside the bed he slept in whenever he visited. Brown frames, one arm slightly bent from the time he sat on them 3 summers ago. I picked them up and set them on the dresser so I would remember to give them back, and that was when I noticed his jacket. He had draped it over the chair in the corner, the old wooden one that belonged to my wife. She used to sit in that chair to read. I had not moved it since she passed. I picked up the jacket to hang it in the closet for him, and something slid out of the inside pocket and landed face up on the hardwood floor. It was his phone. The screen was lit up from the impact, and the first thing I saw before it dimmed again was a photograph. I stood there for a moment without moving. My mind did not process it immediately, the way your mind sometimes refuses to process things that do not fit inside the world you have built for yourself. The photo was of my wife. Not a recent photo. She was younger in it, maybe mid-40s, standing in front of the house we used to own out on Carver Road. She was smiling at whoever was holding the camera. Her hair was shorter than I remembered it. She looked happy. I told myself there was nothing strange about it. My brother had known my wife for 34 years. They had been close. Of course he had old photographs of her. I had hundreds of them myself. But the photograph was her wallpaper. It was the first thing that appeared when his phone turned on. And something about that, something I could not name right away, settled in my chest like a stone. I set the phone on the dresser next to the glasses, and I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, and I drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the backyard. The oak tree my wife planted the year we moved in was turning, the leaves going orange at the edges. She had loved that tree. I went back to the bedroom. I told myself I was going to leave the phone where it was and walk away. I told myself that whatever was on that phone was none of my business, and that my brother was the closest person I had left in this world, and that I was a 63-year-old man who had recently buried his wife and was probably looking for reasons to feel something other than grief. I picked up the phone anyway. It was not locked. My brother had never used a passcode. He said he had nothing to hide. I went to the photos first because that is where I had started in my mind already. The wallpaper. There were more pictures of my wife than I could count. Hundreds of them, organized into an album he had labeled with her first name, Margaret. Some of them I recognized. Family gatherings, holidays, the trip we all took to the coast 6 years ago. But some of them I had never seen before. Photos taken at angles I did not recognize. Photos where she did not seem to know she was being photographed. My hands were not steady when I opened his messages. I almost closed the phone then. I think part of me understood that what I was about to find was going to change something that could not be changed back. And I was tired. I had been tired since Margaret died 8 months ago. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and does not go away with sleep. I did not know if I had the strength for another loss. I opened the messages anyway. The conversation was with a contact saved as a woman's name I recognized immediately. Pauline. Pauline Garrett. She had been Margaret's closest friend for over 20 years. They had met in a book club of all things, and they had been inseparable ever since. Vacations together, phone calls every Sunday, the kind of friendship that outlasts most marriages. Pauline had sat in the front row at Margaret's funeral. She had held my hand during the service. I read slowly at first, then faster. The messages went back 14 months, before Margaret died. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. I sat in the same room where my brother slept when he visited, next to the chair that had belonged to my wife, and I read things I cannot fully describe, even now. Not because they are too painful, though they are, but because some of what I read does not fit inside language the way I need it to. What I can tell you is this. My brother and Pauline had been involved with each other for at least 2 years. That much was clear from the early messages, and it was painful to read. But it was not the thing that turned my blood cold. People make mistakes. People betray the people they love. I had lived long enough to know that. It was the other messages, the ones from the last 4 months of Margaret's life. My wife had been sick. She had a heart condition, something she had been managing for 6 years with medication and monthly checkups with her cardiologist, a careful and serious man named Dr. Elias Brandt. She was not dying. That is what I need you to understand. She was sick, but she was managed, and Dr. Ted Brandt had told us as recently as 18 months ago that she could expect many more years with the right care. She was 61 years old. She had plans. We had plans. She died in her sleep on a Tuesday in February, and the official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, sudden and unexpected, the paperwork said. Dr. Brandt had been as devastated as anyone. He told me afterward that sometimes the heart simply stops without warning, that even well-managed conditions can turn without giving you time to prepare. I had believed him. I had sat with that explanation for 8 months, and I had believed it because there was no reason not to. The messages between my brother and Pauline talked about Margaret's medication. Specifically, they talked about changing it. There were messages where Pauline mentioned picking up one of Margaret's prescriptions for her, something she had done before, as a kindness. Because Pauline lived near the pharmacy and Margaret's mobility had been limited in her final months. There were messages where my brother asked whether the new pills looked different from the old ones. There were messages where Pauline told him not to worry, that Margaret would not notice. There was a message from my brother, sent on a Thursday in January, that said only, "How much longer do you think?" Pauline had replied, "Not long now. Be patient." I set the phone face down on the dresser, and I sat on the floor of that bedroom with my back against the bed frame, and I did not move for a long time. The thing about grief is that it teaches you what you are made of. When Margaret died, I had learned that I was made of something quieter than I expected. Not strong, exactly. Just quiet. I had moved through the months after a death the way you move through a house after a long illness, carefully, touching the walls, not quite trusting the floor. What I felt sitting on that floor was different. It was not quiet. I have a daughter, her name is Ruth, and she was 37 at the time, and she lived 40 minutes away in the same town where she had gone to high school. Ruth had been my anchor after Margaret died. She came every weekend. She called every morning at 8 o'clock. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of tilting her head slightly when she was thinking hard about something. I called her. I did not tell her everything on the phone. I told her I had found something at the house that she needed to see, and that she should come as soon as she could, and that she should not call her uncle on her way over. She arrived in under an hour. I showed her the messages. Ruth is not a person who cries easily. She gets very still instead, very focused, the same way her mother used to get still in the moments when emotion was too large for expression. She sat at my kitchen table and she read through the phone for a long time without speaking, scrolling back and forth, reading things twice. When she finally looked up, her face was the color of the wall behind her. She said, "Dad, we need to be careful about how we do this." She was right. I knew she was right. But I also knew that if I went to the police with a phone that belonged to my brother, a phone I'd found while going through his jacket while he was not present, the first question they would ask was how I came to have it. I needed something more than screenshots of messages. I needed to understand what had actually happened to Margaret. Ruth suggested we start with Dr. Brandt. She called his office the next morning and explained that she had some questions about her mother's final months of treatment. Questions related to her estate, she said, legal matters. Nothing alarming. She was polite and composed the way her mother had taught her to be, and Dr. Shern. Brandt agreed to see us that Thursday. We sat in his office with the door closed, and Ruth told him the truth. He was quiet for a very long time after she finished. He was a small, careful man in his 60s, with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of delivering difficult news. He looked at the screenshots Ruth had printed out. He read them twice. Then he folded his hands on his desk, and he said something I will not forget. He said, "I have had a question about Margaret for 8 months, and I have not known how to ask it." He told us that in her final weeks, her blood work had shown changes that were consistent with digitalis toxicity, an excess of digitalis, the compound found in several cardiac medications. At the time, he had attributed it to the natural progression of her condition, to the body's changing ability to process the medication she had been on for years. He had adjusted her dosage. She had died 3 weeks later. What he had not known, what he had no reason to suspect, was that someone might have been supplementing her medication without his knowledge, giving her additional doses or a stronger formulation in amounts too small to be obviously alarming but large enough, over time, to do damage. He said, "If what you're telling me is accurate, what you're describing is poisoning." Ruth drove to the pharmacy where Pauline had been picking up Margaret's prescriptions. She did not go in. She sat in the parking lot and called me, and we talked for a long time about what we were going to do. There was a part of me that still could not make the pieces fit together into a shape I recognized. My brother. The man who taught me to fish on the lake behind our grandfather's house. The man who called me every Sunday, who sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee and talking about nothing, who had held the umbrella over my head at Margaret's graveside because it was raining, and I had forgotten mine. We went to the police on a Friday morning. I had spent 2 evenings beforehand going through Margaret's financial documents, something I had put off doing since her death because it felt too final, too much like erasing her. What I found was this. Margaret had maintained a life insurance policy for 22 years, with a payout of $400,000. The original beneficiary had been me. Sometime in the 19 months before her death, the beneficiary had been changed. To my brother, I do not know how he had accessed the documents. I do not know whether Pauline helped him or whether he managed it alone. What I know is that Margaret had mentioned to me, about 2 years before she died, that her brother-in-law had helped her sort through some paperwork when I was traveling for work, and that she had been grateful for his help. She had said it the way you mention any ordinary kindness. She had trusted him completely. The detective who handled our case was a woman named Sandra Okafor, and she was the kind of person who makes you understand why some people are called to certain work. She listened to everything we told her without interruption, took the phone into evidence with the proper documentation, and began making calls within the hour. She told us not to contact my brother or Pauline, and to go about our routines as normally as we could. She also told us to make sure I was not alone. Ruth moved in with me for the following 2 weeks. She slept in the spare bedroom, in the same bed her uncle had used, and every morning she made coffee and sat with me at the kitchen table, and we talked about her mother, the real her mother, the one who had nothing to do with any of this, the one who had planted the oak tree and joined the book club and called her best friend every Sunday and loved her family with a consistency that I have relied on so completely that I had stopped noticing it the way you stopped noticing the walls of your own house. It was Ruth who told me on the 8th day that the police had made 2 arrests. My brother was taken into custody at his home at 6 in the morning. Pauline Garrett was arrested the same hour at her apartment across town. Detective Okafor called me herself to let me know. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I hung up. Ruth came and sat across from me. We did not say much. She reached across and put her hand over mine the way her mother used to, and we sat there in the kitchen with the October light coming through the window. And I thought about the oak tree in the backyard and how Margaret had chosen that specific spot for it, because she said the afternoon light was best there, that trees need the right light to grow straight. What came out during the investigation was thorough and ugly in the way that the truth sometimes is. My brother and Pauline had begun their relationship approximately 2.5 years before Margaret's death. At some point, and the messages documented this with a precision that I still find difficult to comprehend, they had arrived at a plan. Pauline had access to Margaret, to her medications, to the routines of her care. She had used that access over a period of 4 months to administer supplemental doses of a digitalis compound purchased through an online supplier, mixed into Margaret's daily vitamin regimen, in amounts calibrated to appear as a natural worsening of her existing condition. The beneficiary change on the life insurance policy had been accomplished through a forged signature. A handwriting analyst confirmed it. The prosecution was thorough. Detective Okafor had done her work carefully, and what she brought to the district attorney was a case built on messages, financial records, pharmacy logs, medical testimony from Dr. Brandt, and toxicology analysis of tissue samples that had been preserved for Margaret's autopsy. My brother received a sentence of life in prison. Pauline Garrett received 31 years. I will tell you what I told the detective when she asked me how I felt about the disparity. I did not fully understand it at the time. The explanation, as it was given to me by the prosecutor, was that my brother was determined to be the primary architect of the plan, that the evidence supported his role as the one who had initiated the scheme and directed its execution, and that Pauline's cooperation with investigators had been taken into account in sentencing. I have sat with that explanation. I have not made peace with it exactly, but I have accepted it as the answer I am going to have. What I have not fully accepted, what I am still working through, even now, is the particular mathematics of grief that this experience requires. I lost my wife, and then I lost the truth about how she died and had to find it again in the worst possible way. And then I lost my brother, who is alive and in prison, but gone from my life as completely as if he were not. 3 losses that are not separate. 3 losses that are one loss that keeps unfolding. Ruth calls every morning at 8 o'clock. She still has her mother's eyes, and when she tilts her head in that particular way when she is thinking hard about something, I feel something that is not quite grief and not quite gratitude, something that does not have a clean name. The oak tree in the backyard is still there. Last spring I had someone come and look at it because one of the lower branches had split after the ice storm in March. The man who came said it was structurally sound, that split branches like that sometimes look worse than they are, that a tree planted in the right spot with the right light can withstand more than you expect. I thought about Margaret when he said that. I thought about how she had chosen that particular spot, how deliberate she had been about it, how she'd stood in the backyard with her hand over her eyes against the sun, reading the light before she planted anything. She was always the one who knew how to find the right place for things. If you found yourself where I found myself, standing in a spare bedroom, holding a phone that belonged to someone you loved, feeling the weight of something you did not yet understand, I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me. Do not talk yourself out of the question forming in your mind. The mind does not ask questions without reason. The discomfort you feel when something does not fit is not weakness. It is intelligence. It is your life trying to protect itself. Ruth is outside right now. I can hear her moving around in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, the small sounds of ordinary life continuing. The morning light is coming through the front window. It lands on the chair in the corner of the spare bedroom, Margaret's chair, the one I never moved, and turns the wood a particular shade of gold. I try, most mornings, to let that be enough.